All right, so we're building out beats, basic building blocks of beats. We are not going into advanced topics with this right now. It's a simple way for you to get started with a little pattern beat that you can write to. So right now we're gonna look at Ableton, and then we're gonna move over and look at Logic. And with Ableton, we're gonna start with a 4 on the floor, and we're also gonna look at more hip hop beats. So the beats are slightly different. There are many different styles of beats for different styles of music. You might have some sort of 4 on the floor pop electronic dance. You might have hip hop, trap, reggaeton, all this different, and so many more. So today we're just gonna look at some simple ones that are pretty common, at least with the artists that I work with, some simple 4 on the floor and hip hop ones. So to get started, what you can do is just create a new MIDI track, or just drag by going to File, Create, Insert MIDI track, or you can go to Instruments and then Drum Rack and drag it over, and it will create one for you. If you created a new MIDI track this way, you could just do Shift Command T on Mac, or Shift Control T, but it would put it in your right-hand side of your session, and then you could just drag and drop the drum rack in. All right, I'm gonna delete that one. I'll show you two different cool things that we can do here. Rename, so I'm gonna take away that. And let's call this, like, I'll just put 4 on the floor drum rack. So here in our drum rack, we have these empty parts of our instrument rack where we can drag in samples. Let's start with something really simple, like samples that come with Ableton. So they're free. So you can go to samples and then just search. We're gonna want a kick. Let me change the sound a little bit so you can hear it. Okay. So the kind of kick that we want is going to be like an 808 is a very typical one. If you're not familiar with an 808, but you've heard of it, it is this drum machine that was really big back when drum machines came out, and it has great sounds. In short, without going into a long thing on the 808. So it's a great place to get kicks. So we could just drag an 808 into the drum rack. Where did that go? Let me pull that drum rack in again. Because it opened up a sampler there. So, sample. You could even just search like kick 808. And we can also swap the sound out later for something else. Drag it in. We'll also want a snare. So a snare, a clap, and a snap all have that same function as coming in on for 4 on the floor and the 2 and 4. And if it's for hip hop, it's more on the 3rd beat. But let's just pull that one in. We can also swap this out later, and we can get a, let's see, a hi-hat, closed. I think what is happening right now is that I'm clicking on those sounds, and it's opening them up into a sampler. And sorry. Before. Let's do something that's built in. I'm not like a huge fan of these sounds, but they're also the best place to get started. Start with what you have. And then an open one. And then later we could also have different percussive elements like rim shots and crashes and wooden blocks and all kinds of stuff. But what we're gonna do now once we have this is let's set our tempo. So at 94, I was playing around with a hip hop beat at that tempo. Let me just turn that demo off. And let's have this at 120 is super standard for a pop and electronic track. So we'll just set this tempo up here to 120 and also make a little loop here with this loop bar up in the corner. We can even start with a 1 bar loop and then duplicate it later. So with here, I'm gonna highlight all of it. I just click and drag across, and then on my QWERTY keyboard, the QWERTY, the typing keyboard, QWERTY keyboard, do Shift Command M, and we have an empty MIDI track. Now, Command Z, if you don't have that, you can highlight it and then right click and then do Insert MIDI Clip, and that will get you there too. So here we are in a 1 bar loop. So this is the simplest way just to get started. So we'll start with a kick. If a kick is happening on the 4 on the floor, maybe you could, we're gonna put a kick on every initial beat, and you could just drag it out there, or you can press Option and drag, and it will drag it over. It's better to not have it super long. It all depends on your sample for the kick, how long each sample is, how long it's going to sound when it's in the drum rack here. Like this kick has a fairly short body, so having this MIDI length short is not going to clip the end of the sample. So there's that. And if we just press spacebar to play, you're going to hear it. Right? Now let's put, the snare is going to go on the 2 and 4, so you can add it in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, we have it there, right? Hi-hats, these can come in on we'll want these on 8th notes, and you can even highlight them off and then press Command D to duplicate them in Ableton. Now, other things that you can do to spice up your track a little bit is you could use, you know, velocity. So we can click here and hear where the sounds are coming with this headphone icon. And then when we click on the piano roll editor, we can sample what those sounds are. Now, if we click here for the kick on the piano roll editor, and they're all highlighted, you can see how the kicks, these little knobs in the velocity area are pulled all the way down to the bottom. So if we click here, it highlights all of our kicks, and we can just grab them and drag up. And now we are bringing the velocity higher. Now, if we click on the snare, we can see the snares are a lot lower. Hi-hats, they're low. And hi-hats generally are not at the forefront of the beat. They're more just to feel the beat as opposed to being the front and center part of the beat. So we don't need to make them as loud. And I just move them down a little bit to taste to start, but then they can be adjusted as we go along. So let's play this and just get a taste. And then what if we add an open hi-hat at the second part of this beat here? And so there you're hearing a little bit of a groove. What we can do after this is we can duplicate the loop. And now we see here, it's no longer a 2-bar pattern, it's now a 4-bar pattern. And it's exactly the same. Before, up here, we see it riding out from bar 1 to 2, taking up all of that space. But if we duplicate the loop, open up the loop bracket and stretch it out, you'll see it's not necessarily an exact, like one sample repeated. like with a line in between each MIDI clip. It's a continuation of that. Now what we could do is, for example, you'll see how it changes as an example up here in the MIDI clip, because we have this longer 2-bar loop now, where you can move some of these MIDI clips around. Now, what is really important when we're making beats is to create a 2-bar pattern. Very simple to start, and then when we duplicate the 2-bar pattern, adjust the ending of that 2-bar pattern so it has space for a fill, or there is space for something more interesting to happen. So that's where this part here would maybe turn into something else. Now, another thing that we can do to make these sounds more interesting, to give tonal color, we can pitch these sounds in the hi-hats, for example. And I'll show you how we can do that. So first, we can create separate MIDI clips for each instrument if we wanted to. Drums has its own channel, snare has its own. Usually when we produce, this is a good way to get started, but when you want to mix and master your songs, it's good to separate them so they're not all in one kit together, because you need to treat the low end differently from the mids, and then from the highs. The low ends are drums and bass, and snare would be more of have different qualities between mid, some of the highs, and you treat the hi-hats differently than you treat the kick. So that's why you're gonna have to separate them. And if we do work on building a beat together and we build it out in a linear fashion with samples from the get-go, that's why we build it that way. Let's put in a hi-hat here. And also I want to show you what this looks like. So if you bring in samples from Splice. So these are Ableton samples. So first I'm going to show you how to bring in samples from Splice. Let me minimize this a little bit. And then I'm going to show you how you can add tonal color to what you have going on in your beat here. So if we bring in a sample from Splice, I'll pull up some of my all downloads, a kick. Let's use this little kick with a vinyl touch to it. Ooh, that's a nice one too. That one could be good for hip hop. So let's bring in this. So we can just replace what is in the Ableton kick with this Splice sample. These are sounds that I had downloaded from Splice's website, and then this is in the Splice app. So I could also pull in, let's see, a snare. Let's just use that. And same pattern. You can hear that there's a different quality to the sound now. All right, so let's pull in a hi-hat and adjust the tonal color for variation that way. So we can just do Shift-Command-T. We can do Command-R to rename. We're gonna do this with a closed hi-hat. Now let's loop it to our bracket, highlight it all, and then Shift-Command-M for an empty MIDI clip. And then in here, let's pull in a sampler so that we can repitch things. So you can go to sampler. You could even do this with a simpler. I'm pretty sure that comes with Ableton. Yeah, simpler is a more basic level and it achieves the same effect. So this I think is available on Ableton Lite, and sampler is more of the standard and the suite versions. So either one works for this purpose. So let's drag a hi-hat in here. And you don't have to even do this with an external sample. You can do this with a sample within Ableton. So hi-hat, I'm looking for a close sound. So the close sound is a, I'll just show you. So a drum kit, what we're doing is we're replicating these sounds. So this is your drum kit here. These are the hats. So the hats, when they press down together, they are the short close sound. And when they press and then open, that's that longer open sound. So that's what the hi-hat is. So with here, let's pull in a hi-hat. This is a closed one. Okay. So we're here, we can open this up and let's change the grid. I'm gonna right click, let's put it on 8 notes. And I'm gonna press B on my QWERTY keyboard, B as in boy, and it's going to enable the draw function here. Or you can just come and click that, but that is the key command. And you can just click and drag across. So we hear that going, right? Now, if we want to repitch this, maybe we could do, we can like draw, if we draw on those again, they'll disappear, and maybe we'll descend. We could also right click, oops, and do, wait, let me press B again. I'm gonna delete these. And I'm gonna raise the volume of these. We can also put this on 16th notes, press B again. And we can draw down if you want to go just directly down, or this is what this could sound like. Press B, I'm gonna highlight all of these and pull them up in pitch. Now, ultimately, we don't want these always to sound exactly at the same velocity because then it gets robotic. But just to start off with, and then we can apply groove or do it by hand, or you can even automate it and draw it in with your mouse. We're not gonna go in that much detail in the time that we have right now, but listen to this. So let me turn off the hi-hats going on in here. So you can highlight them all and press 0 on your QWERTY keyboard to deactivate, mute these sounds. But we have them muted here, but we have hi-hats going here. Isn't that cool? Hear it right here. And check the comments. Cool. Ariel, love the sparkle jacket. Thanks, girl. Kamisha, what's up? Hey, welcome. Melanie says, is this GarageBand app? Melanie, this is Ableton. All right. So what we can do then, maybe we'd want to make these a little bit louder. Bring them up a little bit. So that's one way to get started. And then what we could do after this is, if we want to add variation on the second and fourth repeat, let's duplicate this loop. We'll draw this out. Now, this second repeat, if we want this beat to sound more interesting, maybe we'll do something different the second time. So we could either cut space, and maybe we'll do something with a sort of rim shot or a clap or something that second time around. I'll delete it here. So let's add that to our drum kit here. Why don't we just pull in a sound from Splice? Let's look at rim shot. You can adjust the volume because I feel like it's a little bit loud compared to the others with the drum and the kick that are already in here, the kick and the snare that are already in here. So let's duplicate this loop, and maybe in the second time around here, I'll add a rim shot here. Put this on 8 notes. What if we did this? See, if we didn't duplicate this, but if we didn't duplicate the MIDI clip at the bottom in the piano roll editor, and instead just duplicated that 2-bar loop and then drew it in the second time, it would have this edit for every iteration of it. And because we only want it the second time around, we're creating a larger loop. And this is a little boring there, so why don't we do something that's maybe and that's something that we could adjust with like the groove function later on. But before we do that, let's pull in a chord progression and a bass line to make it sound cool. So let's open up Splice and search chords. Let's use this first one that comes up. So this one, what I can tell by looking at it in Splice is that it's D major and it's 105 beats per minute. Usually people label it that way. Most of the time, the people who upload these are correct with the tempo and the key, but I have been in situations where it hasn't been accurate. All right, so let's just rename this to chords. All right. I think I'm probably gonna have to bring it down in volume. All right, so with Ableton, it auto works the sample. You see how everything lines up cleanly to the grid? This sample is originally 105 beats per minute, but this session is in 120. So Ableton worked it. I double clicked on this audio region and it worked it so that it lines up to the beat. So now, for the sake of this little tutorial being simple, let's pull in a bass. We're not going to go into too much detail for that right now. So let's pull in a bass sound, and we need something that is in D major. So I'm going to, right now I have all my downloads, something, a bass, and I'm going to look up here D. And you see these lowercase m's mean minor, that we don't want, we want major. Let's listen to these two things that came up. So this is something that we can start with, and then we can chop it up and make it our own. Now, one of the things that we want to do in pulling in samples is to put our own thumbprint on the samples. So this means chopping it up, manipulating the sound, putting effects on it, repitching it, stretching, or morphing the sound so that it's uniquely your own. So we'll see right now that it definitely doesn't fit the chord progression, and here's what we can do to change it. And for the purpose right now, I'll just duplicate that. It sounds like totally all over the place. Like, what the hell is going on? So what we can do is that we can change the underlying bass every time the chord changes. This chord changes every bar. So listen for the chord change. 2 times there, right? So we can at least have one. I'm hit one bass line per bar and transpose it throughout so that it lines up with the chord progression so that tonally it all fits together. So I'm going to use my mouse and click where the chord change happens, and on my QWERTY keyboard, press Command E, or I can highlight and press, well, I guess it would be Edit, and let me put it somewhere else because I already did it there. It'd be split the clip, but I had already split it. So Oh, it didn't come up. So let me just show you what that would look like so that this makes sense. That's what we had. So if we were to split this clip, we could just put the mouse there and do edit split, which is Command E. But before we do that, I'm just gonna press Command D to duplicate it. And now I'm gonna press Command E in between. So we have 4 different parts. Now this first part matches the chord progression. Although it's really fast, like we need to adjust it. The second part doesn't, so I'm just gonna mute that for now. Oh, actually, you know what I'm gonna do? This. I think also what this bass line needs from this song is space. That's one of the big things that we can think about as we're creating beats is creating space. So what I would naturally be inclined to would be to grab the end of this clip where you have this little bracket and pull it in to shorten it. And we can do that for all of them. For now, we're gonna re-pitch the other ones so that they match the chord progression underneath. This one needs to go down in pitch. So the bass line usually underlines the root of the chord. So here we have, it starts on a D, and da, da is what's happening with the chord progression. And it's going down by a semitone. So what we can do is click on, we can double click on the clip. And then in this transpose button, let's pull it down just by 1 semitone. And let's listen to hear how it sounds. That works. Let's get that third one. So that was the original, so let's pull this one down. Now, if I go to -5, it's a 4th underneath, it's an interval of a 4th below the root of whatever note this is playing, which is D in this case. So this one I'm gonna have to match, and one of the things that we know in music theory is that it's very common at the cadence of a chord to go to a 5 chord. This one I can hear that this is a 5 chord going back into this one. And so we're gonna transpose this down so that it hits on the 5th. And that is -7 semitones. All right, so now I also want to create a little bit more space here. It goes da da ba bum bum bum. What if we can press like Command E and cut some of these out? What if we press 0 here on these to see what it would sound like? I'm not deleting it. I can press 0 again and it comes back, but it's a nice way to temporarily mute sections. And you could play with space like that. Now, something that's important to know is that when we have little fills like this descending hi-hat line, it's nice to not put something on top of it because we want each element to stick out and shine on its own. So for example, here in these rim shots, first of all, this many of them, it does sound like a little boring and too much, but let's take some away. And let's also take away what's happening in the kick and snare there. So it's isolated. And I'll just pull that in so it's nice and tight here. Personally, I like this descending hi-hat line at the end. I think it sounds pretty cool, especially at the end of a chord progression, like a little pattern that we have here. So I'm gonna swap these, and I'm gonna swap these as well so that it kind of fits better. And this is too many in a row like this where it doesn't sound as interesting. So I'm gonna highlight them all and I'm gonna bring them in so they're shorter, so they're tighter. Now, the other thing that we can do on top of this is add a little groove, which is gonna have it sink in a little bit more together. So you can go to User Library Grooves. Actually packs, sorry, my bad. So you can go to Core Library, Swing and Groove. This SP1200 is a really classic drum machine that has really nice swing and groove. You could also go to hip hop, MPC, Logic. You could use anything, but I'm gonna use this. Generally, when we're using swing and groove, we want to stay in the 50s. So usually it goes up from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. The 50s, it's less obvious. The 60s and 70s, it's very in your face that there's like this weird more jolted rhythm. We don't want it to be too extreme. We just want a little bit of movement. Why don't we put this, this 54 on it so I can drag it into this groove pool. And then here in this whole track here, I'm gonna put groove, swing 54. Now it didn't do it for all of it, it just did for this one clip. So I can click over here and add it here as well. And I actually, while we're doing it with these drums, I wanted to go on my hi-hats here. Now what I can do to actually make that faster instead of doing for each individual clip is to shift, click for both, and then press Command J. Now they're joined. Here, shift, shift, Command J, join. So now I don't have to do it for each one. Groove, we're gonna want the same groove. So it's not like you have two different drummers in the same song playing two different grooves. So it's one computerized drummer for all of this. Now, this is a starting place. Now, what you're gonna wanna do after this, we have this bass here. I always put my bass above my chords. I have my drums up top, especially kick and snare, and then bass chords. So what we're gonna want after this is to add like a sub bass, which is gonna hit the same time as a kick. So we want it in D because that's the key of our song. So if we can find it in D, great. If we can't find it in D, we can just repitch it. So just search all my downloads I already have already, and I'll just put, we could either just look up here for sub. Now this is if you're using Splice. You don't even need Splice. You could do this with sample in Ableton. I like Splice because they're a little bit more designed with sound design already. So that's a nice sub. What the sub does is it occupies a low frequency in this frequency range between 0 and 20,000. The human ear can really detect up to 20, pretty much at the lowest. Can't really detect 0. The sub is filling in this low end, and we're going to have it matched exactly at the same time with the kick drum, so that when it hits, we're going to feel it through the floor and have a really strong presence for the drums. So I'm going to just drag it in here. I don't even need to create a new channel strip yet. I can just drag it in and it will create one. Command R, sub. So you want to think about your bass as having a like a low end bass and then the high end, like sub and then a bass top. So we know we can zoom in, and something easier that you could even do is put it right underneath to have it match up when we can see when the kick hits. We know that this is the kick, 1, 2, 3, 4. So because this is lined up to the grid, we have that on, we can easily just press Command D to duplicate it, and it's all in time. There's no drum there, no kick drum, so we're not going to put it there. But I could just do Command D, excuse me, and then, excuse me, and then remove these. Oh yeah, and here at the end, I want to remove these as well to let that low end come through. And I'm probably going to want to bring the sound. My go-to is -6 to start, because we want to bring it down, because when we mix and master the songs, especially as we take them to mastering, we need headroom on top of the meters here so that the mastering engineer can bring up the volume in it. So we don't want to max it out now. It's happening, it's pretty loud still, so I'm going to bring it down quite a bit to -10. Now, this is all just to taste, and it can be adjusted later. And I could also even remove that. Or do some sort of like warping sound that's automated at that point. Something else that is cool to add to a beat when you get started is an atmosphere. So let's go into Splice and let's look at atmosphere. Atmosphere, ambience, and it could either be a, well, oh, that came up because sub came up there. So we could either have like high string, it could be people talking, it could be dust, it could be space dust, all different kinds of stuff. This could be cool if we pitch it up. What we wanted to do is fill the high frequency in our track. So let's use this. And I'm gonna zoom out. Okay, so Ableton automatically warped the sound so it fits pretty evenly at the beat. I'm going to transpose it up an octave. So I'm going to click here and transpose and do 12, so it's already high. Let's rename this to atmosphere. And let's pull down the volume. The atmosphere definitely can be sitting back in the mix. It doesn't have to be loud at all. -10 is probably too loud. This is what it sounds like. And then maybe as this part is happening, we can cut some stuff out. Or put effects on it. And also this, we can also with Ableton adjust the beat. So it does sound pretty fast with that, these chord progressions and bass line. So what if we put it at like 100? This is not everything's gonna work. Now I can hear that this atmosphere does match the chord progression that's happening there. So we can just keep it there without editing it even further. This is a basic way to get started. Now, what I would do after here is separate the drum beat. So you could duplicate both of these and you can label one as, well, let's keep one original for now. So one is going to be the kick, one is going to be the snare, one's going to be the rim. So we're gonna delete everything that's not the kick in here. So we can hit on here, highlight the snare, delete. Dream shots, delete. Now we see we only have the kick. Snare, we can go in and delete. Rim, we're gonna click in here, and now you see we've separated these. With the kick, you can do freeze, flatten, now it turns it into audio. And we can use the audio. When we're working with audio, ultimately in our tracks, it's going to be easier on the computer's CPU processing, which is crucial when we're working with a lot of files, and especially when we're working live. Because if you can look up here in the top right corner and you see this percentage start jumping above 30%, even kind of above 20, especially 30, 40, 50 above, you're rolling the dice with crashing your software. So we want to make sure that if you have plugins that you're building in, we can work with them in a session. And then when you're taking it to each next level from mixing, then you're going to want to print them in, especially in mastering. But as we're experimenting in building, we don't need to do that, but just want to show you that process. Now I also group my kick and snare separately. We could just call this drums, kick, and snare. And then the rim, and we can also color this differently. So let's give it like a darker color because it's kind of like the meaty color. For the snare, let's freeze and flatten this too. And this is using the sample that we have that we pulled in. So I like to keep all other percussion, cymbals, crashes, hi-hats, things like that in a different color that's similar to the drums so that we know they're together. But also we're going to treat them separately, treat them differently with different EQ and compression, if we do reverb or any effects. So we want to separate them there. So we could do the same process of freezing and flattening. We can also do the same process of grouping these. We can just call these drum tops. And we have those. We're going to also group the bass. Let's give it the same color. So we can even collapse everything and move easily through our set. So this is just one easy way to get started. Other things that I would add to my drum kit here that not here, but for the sake of time, I would add an open hat for sure. We could do lots of different drum sounds. Like we could do toms and fills, and we could do any sort of wooden block. We could do a ride. That would happen. Here's what the ride looks like. This big one right there, that's when someone's the ride. So you just think it's gonna like propel the sound forward. And it's not a featured part of the sound, but it's like a steady part to the beat to create momentum. This up here is a cymbal that would be used for like a crash. Those are also really good at the beginning of a downbeat, especially at the beginning of a new section, like when the drop hits or when any new section begins. But it's nice to separate, maybe not have the same crash happen at the verse, then the pre-chorus, then the chorus. So only use one cymbal sound every time the chorus happens. And if you want another sort of impact sound, you can use that every time the verse happens, so that there's variation in the beat. Now, if we wanted to do a hip hop beat, what it could look like would be the drum would be something like this. So the kick, instead of being on the 4 and floor, let's mute the other one here. This, you'll, let me mute that. I'm going to solo it right now. Let me duplicate those. So what we have going on here is very simple. This is like the simple broken down version. We have a kick happening, not on the 4 and floor, 4 on the floor. It is on the subdivisions of the beat within a 1-bar beat. We have the hi-hats happening throughout and the snares happening there. So let's just loop it here and you can watch it play through as you're listening. And I left a little space at the end so there could be a fill. Now, what this could look like if you're building something like this in Logic is that you could pull in an Ultrabeat. And Ultrabeat is like a sampler drum machine that together. So you could open up a software instrument, create, click on the plugin devices for instruments, go to Ultrabeat drum machine, stereo, boom, there it is. Now, if we were to play this, it came preloaded with a little pattern, but you can swap out sounds here with ones from Splice. So for example, if we wanted to swap out this kick, we could right click, initialize, sample, and we're gonna load it into the sample device here. So let's just pull in a little kick. Let's just use that. And we can rename it so we know what it is. It's so much louder than some of the other samples that are already preloaded. So what you could do is go up to the voice volume here and you could turn the volume down. So this is the velocity here. Now listen how quiet it is. Right? So that's how you can do it. And also you'll hear the other elements coming in. You can click on all of these and just drag and cancel them out. You can use what's already there, move them slightly, or add your own sounds. And I'm just clicking and dragging, and it's deleting these samples from here. So here, for example, they have a crash on the 1, which is, maybe we can keep that as something that's going to add interest to our sound. Now, notice how this sampler has 32 beats in it. I know that there's a faster way to delete these sounds, but I work in Ableton more than I work in Logic, and I don't work in Ultrabeat as much as I used to. So this is how we're doing it right now. It's going to be faster. This is just a simple, simple, simple way for you to get things going. All right, so let's say we have these beats here for hip hop, like this. We have that crash in the 1. Now, what if we wanted to add a snare on that 3? So we could drag in either a snare that is in Logic already, or pull something in from here. Oh, I think I have my filter reset. Let's use that one. So we're going to go click here, initialize, sample. Let's drag this one in, and let's rename it. So we could put this on, let's see where that comes in. And you would continue to build out your beat in similar patterns that we built in Mount Ableton by bringing them in and playing with them here. We could also adjust the length of the sampler. Right now it's at 32 beats, but we could adjust this to, the common ones would be like 16 or 8 would be the most common. You could also play with swing for the groove here as well, because it really is a big part of bringing in a beat. So this is a very simple way with how you can create your own beats. Now, if you were to bring in chords for your chord progressions and do that in Logic, you could just do open audio for the chords and drag them in that way from Splice. So for example, that's what we have. And that brings it in. So then there's more work to be done to adjust the timing of that, but for the sake of the length of this video, we do have to wrap up. So that would be a whole nother topic, working in Logic there, but that gives you a starting place. All right, so are there any questions? Thank you so much for joining, and I hope this was useful to get you started with some fundamental elements of building out a beat and some, that's it, fundamental elements of building out a beat. And then once you have that, you can adjust and tweak and take it to that next level.